Hey guys, here we are with another video. This one is going to be on DNS and it's going to take you through a installation and then a basic configuration of our DNS server once it's been installed. We're using Bind 9, which fits really well into Ubuntu and doesn't take very much to configure at all. So this shouldn't take us all that long. First thing we need to do, let's get straight into it, is we need to install the package, and so we're going to install Bind 9, and that's all you need to do. That install apt-get sudo apt-get install bind 9, and the package isn't very big, should take you about 30 seconds to download and to install. As you can see, I've already done that, so I don't need to install or upgrade any of the Bind 9 files, and that package is ready to go. There are 3 files that we need to look at, and so let's have a quick look at the directory. We'll just do an ls on etc bind, and that's the directory that contains all the configuration files for us. And you'll see that there are a couple of files there called named.conf, and the ones that we're interested in are the 2 called name.conf.local and named.conf.options. There's also just a names.conf, and that's your main configuration file, but the other 2 files are the ones that we're going to be configuring today for this exercise. Alright, so now that we've established that it's installed, we know that it gets installed into the etc/bind directory, and there are 3 files that we're interested in. Primarily there are 2 that we're going to configure, and that is the names.conf.local and the names.conf.options. We can get started. 2 things that we want to do today. We want to install a cached server so that we can receive DNS from an upstream DNS server. That means that we don't hold any zones at all on our server. We get all our information from another server, and it caches that information onto our server. So it will check our server first for a record or information about records, and if it has it, it will use our server. Otherwise it will go off, find that information on a primary master or a secondary server, and bring that information back in a cached. So basically, if the machine turns off or restarts, then it loses all that information, has to rebuild it again. Works really well for us and not very hard to configure, but in the long term you'd want to have something a little bit more stable than that. You'd want to also have something that you can keep your records on, and so we'll look at that when we look at the master. So we're going to make a cache server to start with. How do we do that? Dead easy. 1 file we need to configure. It's about 3 lines of code. So we're going to do a sudo /etc/bind, and we're going to go to the named.conf file, and we're looking for the options file, and so we'll open that one up, and we better nano that, and you'll see that it's a file that's not terribly big, couple of entries in there, and what I've got is this section here called forwarders open bracket, and I've put an IP address in and I've closed the bracket. Now on your machines, if you're doing this from scratch, you will see that this section is commented out. And you'll see that. And all I've done is I've removed the comments and I've put an IP address in. Now the IP address that you will have on your machine is 0.0.0, and I've put that IP address in. Why? Because that's the IP address of my upstream DNS server. That's the one I'm going to communicate with. That's the one that's going to do all the hard work, and I'm simply going to grab a copy of its results. 3 lines, forwarders, the IP address, and then closing off that particular line of code. Now you can put that anywhere in this file as long as it appears within that bracket and the very last bracket, that bracket, and that semicolon. Sometimes you can, I've seen it, people just type it in fresh up here. Others like to take out the comments and use the pre-existing suggestion. Either one will work. Just make sure you don't do it twice. So if you're going to type it in fresh up here, then don't put it in twice. That's it. We can save that, and that's done. You'll need to restart your machine, so sudo etc.init.d/bind 9, restart, and that should stop and start the service, and that's worked really well. You can check to see that that actually has taken place. We can use a little utility called dig, and we're going to dig on the local IP address, and we'll do that, and you'll see that we've got a response, and what you're looking for is the server. So it actually has queried, took 38 seconds to query that IP address there and come back with a response. And so that's the kind of information that you're after just there, making sure that that information is right. Cool, so that's worked really well and I'm happy with that, and now we're ready to move on to the next step, which is simply to create our own zone within our DNS server. Now this has some major advantages. As I said before, it means that we've got our own zone that can be modified. We can add our own records to the zone if we wanted to communicate or contact particular machines. We can set up our own computer names, our own domain name, our own fully qualified domain name, so that we can access servers using that name rather than having to use IP address. So there's lots of reasons why we'd want to do this. So to create a primary master record, you can create a secondary secondary record, but we want to create that primary master first because we can't have a secondary DNS zone until we've got the primary. So what we want to do is go through that process. We've got to modify one file again, and so it's just sudo nano etc/bind names.conf, and this time we're going to modify the names.conf.local. And so go into there, and you'll see that I've already gone through and modified this now. I've got that there for you ready to go. You can have a look at that, and I'll leave it on screen for a moment for you to grab that information down. But effectively the file is only got comments through it, and I've added 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. I'll explain what that is, and we'll go from there. So the first thing you need to do is identify the zone. And so we're going to create a zone within what we call a forward zone lookup, not a reverse zone lookup. A forward zone lookup called example.mfit.edu.au. And so you need to make sure that you put that into this file exactly as it is. You need to identify the type of zone. So we're saying that this is a master, and that's really important as against a secondary. And then you need to specify where the file exists on the server. So you're really just saying that there is a file on the server that is my zone file that has all the zone information in it, and this is where it lives. And then you need to close it off. So once you've made that change, then we can move on to the last step, and that is actually to create this file. This file doesn't exist at the moment, and so we need to go through the process of creating that file. And that's the last step that we need to do in this process before we get this working. Okay, to do that I'm just going to exit out of this file, and I need to you can create this file from scratch if you want to, but the easiest way to do it is to actually take a copy of a pre-existing file. So to do that, we're just going to use the copy command, sudo cp, and there happens to be some files that already live in the bind directory. So we're just going to go there, and we're looking for a db file, db.local. Now this file is for my local loopback or my local interface, And so we need to modify this quite a lot, but it'll do as a template, and that's all we're doing is taking a template. And we're going to copy it back into the same directory, but this time we're going to change what we copy it as, and it's important that we give it the same name as we just specified in that last file. So it would be db.example.mfit.edu.au. No news is good news, and so that's copied over, and we can check to see that that has copied. We'll go into Nano, and this time we're going to go into the DB example, and there it is there. So having a look at that file, we can see that it's set up for the local loopback, as I mentioned, and so we don't need to change this line, but it's good to have the right kind of information, because that's just a comment to show people where they are and to give people feedback. And so it would be good to make this accurate, so we could say that this is the bind data file for example.mfit.edu.au. So as I said, this is our forward zone lookup, and so this is going to represent the forward zone for that domain, that fully qualified domain name called example.mfit.edu.au. So we need to remove anything that talks about the local host, because it's not going to be the local host, and we need to replace it with the right terminology. So SOA stands for Start of Authority, and so the start of authority for this server is going to be ns.example, fully qualified domain name, .mfit.edu.au. And you'll notice that I'm going to leave the full stop or the period at the end of the AU, because that's the start of this particular DNS zone. That's where it's going to start. It's going to use that period as a starting point, and it's going to read the files, any files, backwards or forwards, depends on the way you look at it. This next entry is for an email address, and you'll notice that the traditional @ symbol is missing, and that's okay. We want a full stop there, but again, it needs to be an email address that is active. For us, it doesn't matter, but if this was real to life situation, we would make sure that that's an active email address. And so root.example.mfit.edu.au, and again leaving that full stop or period at the end. Now the only line that we need to modify here is this one, and we're going to increment this by 1, and every time you make a change in this file before restarting it, you would increment this by 1. And so that serial number needs to go up to 3. We can leave the next line, the next line, the next line, and the next line, but we do need to have a look at these following lines. So these are quite important areas. So this first line is really saying that my NS server is going to be ns.example. Now this is an NS record. How do I know that? Because of this NS here. There are a couple of different record types, and we've talked a bit about that, but let me just go through them again. There is the A record, or the address record, and so that's usually when you've got a name referencing an IP address. There's the NS record for the name server, and so this is also can be seen as your start of authority up here. And so the start of authority is nsexample.mfit.edu.au, and down here it's going to be the same for my name server. There can also be alias records using CNAMEs, MX records for mail exchange, and so we can place all those into this file. So that first line needs to be NS for name server, and we need to reference the name server by its fully qualified domain name. And again, leaving that full stop at the end. So that's the first line, very important line. The second line is going to be along a similar line, but we're going to replace that @ symbol with NS, because we need to tell it that the server called ns.example.mfit.edu.au actually has an IP address, and so we use that A as the reference to an address record, and we need to change this to the IP address of our name server or the DNS server. In our case, it's 192.168.100.36. Done. That last record there is for my IP version 6. We can leave that in there, but I'm going to put in one more record, and that is to show you that then we can start to name computers. So if I had a web server and I wanted to call it www, I would go www here, dot, and then it would be the fully qualified domain name. So when it's reading it, it needs to have in, it's an IP address, an A record or an address record, and then the IP address of that web server. Let's say that it was 90. So the way it would read is it would come hit our zone, and it would start with a period, and it would read, well, back up here we can use this as an example. It wouldn't read this, but it's looking in the file example.mfit.edu.au, reading this backwards. I'm in the right domain, top level, and edu, good, mfit, example dot www. Found it. What's its IP address? There it is. Bang. I can now communicate with it on the network. And so that's how that whole process works. And so we could put multiple ones of these in if we wanted to. If I had a machine called Pete, I could go a record and then another IP address for that particular machine, and so on. If I had a mail server, I might call it mail. And now this one's important. I'm changing that to MX because that identifies in the zone in DNS that this is actually a mail server, and so other mail servers will look for that to be able to communicate with other mail servers on a network. And so again, a unique IP address for my mail server. And that's it. I need to save that. And we need to restart the server. And so we just do a restart of the server. And now I have a cached server that's communicating with my upstream server. And I also have my own zones in my primary master zone. And so now I'm able to communicate with other machines in that domain using that fully qualified domain name. That simple, not very hard at all. All right, guys, look forward to catching up with you real soon, and take it easy. Have fun. Cheers. Bye.